Jonathan Pierce sat in the third row of the Oprah Winfrey Show audience, wearing a perfectly tailored Armani suit that cost more than most people's annual salary. But his expensive clothes couldn't hide the emptiness in his eyes. At 45 years old, he was worth $2.3 billion, owned companies across 3 continents, and had been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine 6 times. He was also the loneliest man in America. The letter he had written to Oprah 2 months ago had been composed in his penthouse office at 3 a.m., after another evening spent in a 5-star restaurant surrounded by people who called him friend, while calculating how much they could get from him. How do you explain to someone that you've achieved everything society says should make you happy, but you wake up every morning wondering if anyone would care if you disappeared, if you had never been born, if you were just another obituary in the business section that people skipped over to get to the sports scores? The irony wasn't lost on Jonathan that he could buy anything in the world except the one thing he desperately wanted: someone who loved him for who he was, rather than what he could provide. He had hired investigators to do background checks on potential friends, had endured countless dinners where people pitched business ideas between courses, had watched his own children calculate their inheritance prospects during family holidays. Today's show theme was what money can't buy, and Oprah was discussing the hidden costs of extreme wealth, the isolation that can come with success, the way money can create barriers even as it removes others. Jonathan had been invited as part of the audience after the show's producers had been intrigued by his letter, though they didn't know the full extent of his fortune or the depth of his despair. But sitting there, listening to Oprah talk about the things that truly matter in life, Jonathan felt like a case study in everything that was wrong with the American dream. He had climbed the mountain of success only to discover that the view from the top was nothing but empty sky and the realization that he had lost everyone who might have celebrated the journey with him. The moment that changed everything came when Oprah asked the audience a question that seemed to slice straight through Jonathan's carefully contracted image. How many of you have ever felt like your success has cost you more than you were willing to pay? How many of you have achieved everything you thought you wanted, only to realize it wasn't what you needed? Jonathan's hand went up automatically, thinking of all the relationships that had withered under the weight of his wealth, all the genuine connections that had been replaced by transactions, all the love that had been corrupted by the possibility of financial gain. Oprah noticed his expensive suit, his obvious wealth, but more importantly, she noticed the profound sadness in his posture, the way he sat like a man who had everything and nothing simultaneously. She walked over to his row with that intuitive grace that had made her America's most trusted voice, understanding somehow that this man's story would challenge every assumption about wealth and happiness. "What's your name, honey?" Oprah asked, settling into a chair that had been brought over, sensing that this conversation would require careful attention. "Jonathan Pierce," he replied, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone who had spent decades giving presentations to boardrooms full of powerful people. But underneath the professional polish, there was something fragile, something that suggested this confidence was performance rather than reality. "Jonathan, tell us what kind of work you do," Oprah said, though something in his demeanor had already given her clues about his financial status. "I'm a businessman," Jonathan replied, which was both completely accurate and completely inadequate to describe the empire he had built. "I started with nothing and built several companies. I've been financially successful." The understatement was so profound that several audience members smiled, recognizing the way wealthy people often minimized their fortunes in public settings. "How successful?" Oprah asked with the direct approach that had made her famous. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, understanding that once he answered this question honestly, everything about how people saw him would change. "I'm worth about $2.3 billion, he said simply, and the studio fell completely silent. The audience processed this information with visible shock. This wasn't just wealth. This was fortune on a scale that most people couldn't even conceptualize. $2.3 billion, Oprah repeated slowly. "That's an extraordinary achievement. You must be very proud." "I should be," Jonathan replied, But his voice carried no pride, no satisfaction, no joy in what should have been the culmination of a lifetime of work. I should be proud and grateful and happy. But I'm not. The studio was beginning to understand that they were about to hear something unexpected, not a celebration of success, but an examination of its hidden costs. Tell us why, Oprah said gently, understanding that some stories require patience to unfold properly. Jonathan looked around the studio, at faces that were now seeing him differently, calculating his worth, wondering what it would be like to have that kind of money. He had seen these expressions thousands of times before, and he knew exactly what was happening in their minds. Because I don't have a single person in my life who loves me for who I am, Jonathan said, and the words seemed to tear something inside him as he spoke them. Not one person who would care about me if I lost everything tomorrow. The audience was beginning to grasp the magnitude of what he was describing. This wasn't about being lonely sometimes, or having relationship difficulties. This was about complete isolation, wrapped in material abundance. Tell us about your family, Oprah said, suspecting that the story would begin there. Jonathan's face hardened slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the pain of someone who had been betrayed by the people who should have loved him unconditionally. I have 2 children from my first marriage, he said. Emma is 22, and David is 19. I thought they loved me, but I found out they were recording our conversations, trying to get me to say things they could use to contest my will if I changed it. The studio gasped audibly, understanding the cruelty of children who would manipulate their father's love for financial gain. My ex-wife remarried 2 years after our divorce was final, Jonathan continued, to my former best friend and business partner. They're living in the house I bought for us, raising my children to see me as a bank account rather than a father. What about your current marriage? Oprah asked, though something in his expression suggested this story wouldn't be happier. My current wife is having an affair with her personal trainer, Jonathan said with the flat delivery of someone who had become numb to betrayal. I know because my security team informed me. She doesn't know that I know, and she's planning to file for divorce next month to try to get half everything. The audience was stunned into silence, witnessing the systematic destruction of trust that extreme wealth could create. How did you find out about the affair? Oprah asked. I hired investigators to follow her because I suspected something was wrong, Jonathan replied. Do you know what it's like to pay people to tell you the truth about your own wife? To not be able to trust your own family without professional verification. His voice was growing stronger, as if finally speaking these truths aloud was giving him permission to feel the full weight of his isolation. What about friends? Oprah asked. Business associates? People who knew you before you became wealthy? Jonathan laughed, but it was a sound without humor, filled with bitterness and recognition of how naive that question was. I haven't had a genuine friend in 15 years, he said. Every person who approaches me wants something. Every conversation eventually becomes a pitch for investment, a request for money, a suggestion for how I could help with some cause or business venture. He looked directly into the camera, speaking to millions of viewers who would never understand the burden of extreme wealth. I've tested it, he said. I've told people I was thinking of giving away my fortune, becoming a teacher or a park ranger, living a simple life. Do you know how quickly they disappear when they realize they can't get anything from you? The studio was completely quiet now, beginning to understand that they were witnessing a kind of poverty that no amount of money could solve. The poverty of genuine human connection. Jonathan, Oprah said, what would your life look like if you had no money at all? I think about that every day, Jonathan replied immediately, as if he had been waiting for someone to ask that question for years. I think about what it would be like to meet someone who didn't know my net worth, who liked me because I made them laugh, or because we shared interests, or because they enjoyed spending time with me. When was the last time you felt genuinely loved? Oprah asked, and the question seemed to hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking back through years of calculated relationships, strategic marriages, and children who saw him as an inheritance rather than a father. 26 years ago, he said finally. When I was 19 years old, broke, living in a studio apartment with my best friend from high school. His name was Marcus, and we were both struggling to pay rent, eating ramen noodles for dinner, dreaming about the future. His voice grew softer as he remembered, and for the first time since the conversation began, there was warmth in his expression. Marcus believed in me when I had nothing to offer him except friendship. He helped me study for business school, loaned me money for interview clothes, celebrated with me when I got my first job. He was the best man at my first wedding, and I was the best man at his. What happened to Marcus? Oprah asked, though something in Jonathan's tone suggested this story wouldn't have a happy ending. I got rich, Jonathan said simply. I started my first company, and it was successful beyond anything we had imagined. I offered Marcus a job, a partnership, a chance to be part of what I was building. And he said no? Oprah guessed. He said yes, Jonathan replied. But our friendship couldn't survive the power dynamic that money created. I became his boss, his source of income, his ticket to a lifestyle he couldn't afford on his own. Every conversation became about business. Every decision I made affected his life financially. The audience was beginning to understand the subtle ways that extreme wealth could poison even the most genuine relationships. We grew apart, Jonathan continued. Not because we stopped caring about each other, but because money had gotten between us in ways we didn't know how to navigate. He started to resent being dependent on me, and I started to question whether he was my friend or my employee. Do you still talk to him? Oprah asked. No, Jonathan said, and the word carried the weight of a loss that no amount of money could heal. He left the company after 5 years, said he needed to find his own path. We promised to stay in touch, but friendship is hard to maintain when one person can buy a private jet and the other person is worried about making rent. That's when something extraordinary began to happen. From the back of the studio, a voice called out that seemed to change the entire energy of the room. Johnny? Johnny Pierce? Is that really you? The cameras swung toward the voice, revealing a middle-aged black man in a simple button-down shirt and khakis who was standing and staring at Jonathan with an expression of recognition and disbelief. Jonathan's head snapped toward the voice, and his entire demeanor changed in an instant. The billionaire mask fell away, replaced by something raw and authentic that the audience hadn't seen before. Marcus? Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking completely. Marcus Williams? Yeah, man, it's me, Marcus said, beginning to move toward the front of the studio with a smile that seemed to light up the entire space. I can't believe it's really you. The reunion that followed was captured by every camera in the studio, but no technology could adequately record the magnitude of what was happening. Two men who had been best friends, separated by wealth and time and the complications that success can create, were seeing each other for the first time in over 15 years. Marcus, Jonathan said, standing up instinctively as his former best friend approached. What do you do here? How did you? I'm here with my wife, Marcus explained, gesturing toward a woman in the audience who was wiping tears from her eyes. She loves Oprah, and when she heard the theme was about what money can't buy, she insisted we come. I had no idea you would be here. When they embraced, it was with the unself-conscious affection of people who had shared dreams and struggles before money complicated everything. The studio audience watched two middle-aged men hug like the 19-year-old friends they had once been. Marcus, Jonathan said, holding his friend at arm's length, I've missed you so much. I've thought about calling you 1,000 times, but I never knew what to say. You could have said anything, Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. You could have said, hello, you were my best friend, Johnny. Money never changed that for me. The studio was witnessing something unprecedented, a billionaire being reminded of who he was before he became what he owned. But I hurt you, Jonathan said. I made you dependent on me, made our friendship about business instead of just letting it be what it was. Marcus shook his head, understanding something that Jonathan had never realized. "You didn't hurt me, man. I hurt myself by making it about money instead of about friendship. I let my pride get in the way of what we had." Oprah watched this reunion with the amazement of someone who had facilitated thousands of emotional moments, but rarely saw transformation happen so quickly and completely. "Marcus," she said, "tell us about the Jonathan you knew before he became a billionaire." Marcus smiled, and when he spoke, it was with the warmth of someone who had seen the best in his friend and never forgotten it. "Johnny was the funniest guy I knew," Marcus said, looking at Jonathan with affection that was completely free of calculation. "He could make me laugh until my stomach hurt. He was loyal, generous with everything he had, even when it wasn't much. He was the kind of friend who would give you his last dollar if you needed it. And he was brilliant," Marcus continued. "Not just smart about business, but brilliant about people, about figuring out how to solve problems, about seeing possibilities where other people saw obstacles." The audience was hearing about a completely different person than the isolated billionaire who had been sitting in their midst. "What was it like being his friend?" Oprah asked. "It was like having a brother," Marcus replied immediately. "We looked out for each other, celebrated each other's successes, helped each other through failures. When Johnny got his first business loan, I was more excited than he was. When I got married, he was the first person I called." Jonathan was crying openly now, not from sadness, but from relief, from being seen and known and loved by someone who remembered who he was before money made everything complicated. "Marcus," Jonathan said, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for letting money get between us. I'm sorry for not fighting harder to keep our friendship. I'm sorry for becoming someone who forgot how to be a friend." "You didn't forget," Marcus said immediately. "You just got scared. Money makes everything scary. You start questioning everyone's motives, including your own. But Johnny, the person I knew, the person I loved like a brother, that person is still there." That's when Marcus did something that demonstrated why their friendship had been so precious to begin with. He looked directly at Jonathan and said exactly what Jonathan needed to hear. "If you lost every penny tomorrow," Marcus said, "if you were back in that studio apartment eating ramen noodles and dreaming about the future, I would still want to be your friend. I would still want to talk to you every week, still want to celebrate your victories and help you through your struggles." The studio audience was witnessing the antidote to everything Jonathan had described. Love that existed independent of money, friendship that was based on character rather than calculation. "But more than that," Marcus continued, "I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I'm proud that the kid I knew who had big dreams actually made those dreams come true. You've built companies that employ thousands of people. You've created wealth that supports families. You've achieved something incredible." He paused, understanding the weight of what he was about to say. "But Johnny, your success doesn't change who you are. You're still the guy who helped me through calculus, who drove me to job interviews when I didn't have a car, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Money didn't make you a different person. It just gave you different problems." Oprah turned back to Jonathan, who was staring at his friend with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe that someone could know him completely and still choose to love him. "Jonathan," she said, "how does it feel to be seen for who you are rather than what you have?" "Like coming home," Jonathan said immediately. "Like remembering something I had forgotten about myself. Like being reminded that I'm a person, not just a net worth." The show continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus sharing stories about their friendship, their dreams, their shared struggles when they were young and broke and full of possibility. They talked about staying up all night planning businesses that would change the world, about the way they had supported each other through heartbreak and failure and success. But the most powerful moment came when Oprah asked Jonathan what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. "I want to remember how to be a friend," Jonathan said, looking at Marcus with gratitude. "I want to use my resources to help people, but not in a way that makes them dependent on me or changes the fundamental nature of our relationships." He turned to face the camera, speaking to millions of viewers who might be struggling with their own version of success and isolation. "I want people to know that money is a tool, not a goal," he said, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had learned this lesson the hard way. "I want them to know that the richest person isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most genuine relationships." Marcus added his own wisdom, "And I want people to know that friendship can survive anything if both people are willing to fight for it. Money, time, distance, pride. None of that matters if you remember what you mean to each other." The episode ended with Jonathan and Marcus exchanging phone numbers, making plans to have dinner the following week, and promising rebuild the friendship that money had complicated but never actually destroyed. The show aired 6 weeks later, and the response was unprecedented. The episode sparked conversations about wealth, friendship, the true meaning of success that continued for months. Business schools began incorporating discussions about the psychological effects of extreme wealth into their curricula. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Jonathan himself. 3 months after the show aired, he sent Oprah a photo of himself and Marcus at a baseball game, eating hot dogs and laughing like the young men they had once been. "Dear Oprah," he wrote, "I wanted you to know that finding Marcus again has changed everything, not just because I have my best friend back, but because he's helped me remember how to be a friend to others." He described how he had restructured his approach to relationships, how he had learned to separate his personal life from his business life, how he had started volunteering in ways that allowed him to contribute without the complications that large financial donations could create. Most importantly, Jonathan wrote, "I've learned that loneliness isn't the inevitable cost of success. It's the result of forgetting who you are underneath what you've achieved." A year later, Jonathan was featured in a follow-up episode of The Oprah Winfrey Show. He appeared not as someone who had been saved from isolation, but as someone who had learned to use his wealth as a tool for connection rather than a barrier to it. "The beautiful thing about finding Marcus again," Jonathan told Oprah during his return visit, "is that it reminded me that I'm capable of genuine friendship. That gave me the confidence to be vulnerable with other people, to risk rejection, to invest in relationships without calculating the return." He had started a foundation that focused on supporting friendships and community connections, funding programs that brought people together around shared interests rather than financial need. Marcus had become his business partner in this venture, bringing his background in social work to complement Jonathan's business expertise. "What we've learned," Marcus said during the follow-up show, "is that the antidote, loneliness, isn't finding people who want your money. It's finding people who want your time, your attention, your authentic self." 2 years later, Jonathan Pierce is still worth billions of dollars. But more importantly, he's rich in the ways that matter most. He has rebuilt his relationship with his children, who have learned to see him as a father rather than an inheritance. He has divorced his unfaithful wife and found love with someone who knew him before she knew his net worth. "I learned that the question isn't whether money changes people," Jonathan reflects. "It's whether we let money change us in ways that disconnect us from what makes us human." Wealth can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how we choose to carry it. His friendship with Marcus has become the foundation for a life filled with genuine relationships. They still meet every week for breakfast, still call each other when they need advice, still celebrate each other's victories and support each other through challenges. The loneliness that once defined Jonathan's existence has been replaced by a deep understanding of what it means to be wealthy in all the ways that matter. He has learned that the most valuable currency isn't money. It's trust, love, laughter, and the knowledge that someone would miss you if you were gone, not because of what you could provide, but because of who you are. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about accumulating wealth, but about learning what wealth is actually worth. Sometimes the richest people are the ones who understand that no amount of money can buy the feeling of being truly known and loved. And sometimes the most valuable investment you can make is in remembering who you were before success made you forget how to be human.